been a while.
Yeah, hello. My goodness.
Everybody say hi to Paul.
Hello, everyone.
And Ryan and Abby.
Hello,
and
everyone.
me.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone.
Okay.
Nice to see you all in gallery waving. So many friends out there. Hello. Aw. Thank you for joining us tonight. Put a hello in the chat, what you've been up to, where you're hailing from. Have you heard Paul speak before? Rainy here in Pennsylvania too.
Hello, Tracy Bosnian. Hey.
Yeah, we both know Tracy.
Yeah, we're friends. Yeah.
Hi, Carolyn in Idaho.
My friend Dana. Hi, Dana. Brenathan. Hi.
Ginger in Texas. Cindy in Alberta, Canada. Saskatchewan. Yay.
Lynn. Hi, Lynn. It's so fun. Zoom is getting more fun for me than it used to be.
You,
Getting the
Katie?
hang of it. It's how I socialize now.
Yeah.
So I want to welcome everybody. I'm so glad you're taking time out of your day to join us. And I especially want to welcome our two guests, actually, Ryan Clover, who has been part of the BotanicWise team from Maple Creative. He's been with us for 2 years now, just over 2 years. And he helps us with a lot of website, technical, emailing type issues. But what I love about Ryan is he's sort of heart and soul into the topics that BotanicWise offers. And this topic is kind of near and dear to his heart. So we're actually putting him on the panel a little bit to have some of the conversation with Paul. And then Paul Bergner is the man of the hour, flying through space in a weird sort of way right now. But Paul Bergner, if you have not heard him speak before or not familiar with his work, he's the director of the North American Institute of Medical Herbalism. He is a medical herbalist, a clinical nutritionist, an educator, an author, and a naturalist. He studied and practiced natural medicine, nutrition, and medical herbalism since 1973, when I was just a wee little person. And he's written 7 books and has published and edited the Medical Herbalism Journal since 1989. He's taught all aspects of clinical herbal nutrition since 1996, and he's taught academically at university, undergraduate, and master's levels. And he's mentored more than 400 students through his clinical residency program. So I don't know where we want to start with this. Maybe Ryan, you can take it from here and kind of lead the way.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Charis. And hello, Paul. And also thanks, Abby, who's running technical support behind the scenes here. I'm Ryan. I'm in Ithaca, New York. And just a couple quick technical details before we start. You're welcome to turn your video on or leave it off. It's up to you. At any point, you can go to gallery mode, top right. You can see everybody here. Feel free to drop questions and comments in the chat throughout. And we'll be doing a Q&A at the end with Paul. And we are really excited today to tackle some of the big questions around food intolerances. Things that came up, come up around this topic are, for example, like what health conditions can be impacted by food intolerances, common pitfalls when trying to identify and address them, why some people feel better when they eat the foods that they're reacting to, and the process that Paul uses to identify and address food intolerances, and also talking about foods that are essential for healing and repair. So these are a bunch of really big, juicy topics. So let us know in the chat if you're ready, and we'll dive right in. This is, as Charis mentioned, we're going to be, and also if there's a particular one of these topics that really stands out for you, we'd love to make sure that we address it. As Charis mentioned, this is going to be fairly conversational. I'm coming to this topic, as a student, as someone who's learning this topic. And so I have some questions for Paul, but I'm also a little bit skeptical. So we might have a little bit of fun with, thinking through some of the things that, the skeptical part of my mind is going to throw at Paul and seeing how he reacts to it. So feel free to share your skepticisms as well, because I think that's part of what makes this topic challenging, but we're going to try to have a little bit of fun with it tonight because it is challenging. I think a lot of us can relate to, being the one or not wanting to be the one who's like, oh, I can't eat that, what's in that, so we want to have a little bit of fun with that dynamic tonight and learn from Paul. So Paul, are you ready to get started?
I'm all ready.
Awesome. Thank you. So the first big question, just sort of kick things off, is just to tell us a little bit about, how you discovered this topic. Like, what was it that happened in your life that made you realize that this was a thing?
Yeah, sure. I can do that. We had, like many of us when I was a child, my father was a doctor, so it's kind of a medical family, but my brothers and sisters were diagnosed with allergies, and my father had hay fever. And so these are allergies, but they're diagnosed with food allergies. And so I didn't think much of it. I didn't think it affected me. I thought it was sort of a nuisance for some of my brothers and sisters. And my life went on, blah dee, blah da. And then I'm about 38 years old, and I'm running a natural foods grocery in New Haven, Connecticut. It's called Edge of the Woods Grocery. One of its successor stores is still there. It's a physical labor. I go in the morning before dawn to the produce terminal, and I get all the new produce for the day, and bring it into the store. It's a manual work and pretty hard work. And I started just getting really tired, right? And I go, ugh, and more tired, right? And I go to a doctor, they can't find anything wrong with me. And I go to a metabolic specialist, he can't find anything wrong with me. And I'm seriously tired. I can hardly work anymore. And I get so I can't even lift a 40-pound box of produce off the floor. And no doctors can tell me what's going on. And I remember I was telling my mother on the phone, my father was this conservative right-wing medical doctor, and she's telling my father, oh, he is done. And he says, tell him to cut out dairy. His brother and sisters all had dairy allergies, right? And he was a grumpy old guy, right? And that was so I tried it. I know none of the other doctors, none of the naturopaths, nobody suggested I cut out the dairy, and completely recovered my strength. For about 3 or 4 weeks, completely recovered my strength. Stuff I didn't know was wrong with me went away. Like my constant abdominal bloating went away. My constant gas went away, digestive things, but then also irritability, temper outbursts and all that stuff. So stuff with my mood. My body felt better. I got my strength back, and I go, oh, that's amazing. And if I would eat the smallest amount, I would just like cheat and say, well, I can have a piece of pizza, right, with some cheese on it. And I'd eat some pizza, and oh my gosh, man, I get abdominal bloating. I just get really upset for 3 or 4 days. I would just get completely inflamed. So I spent some time there, some years there, probably 5 years, thinking that I kind of was an unusual person, that I had a handicap of some sort, that I thought of myself as a gastrointestinal handicapped person, right? And thought I was kind of unique, and it was hard to avoid the foods. This was in the 80s, so they weren't talking about food intolerance in the 80s, right? You hear about it all the time now. No one was talking about it. So, so I did it, and it helped. So a couple of years later, I go to, I'm attending the Naturopathic Medical College in Portland. And this is in the 80s. And in the 80s, there are all these new doctors coming in, and we were going to be scientific naturopaths, right? But the faculty and some of the people hanging around, these were the old gray-haired guys who'd been practicing naturopathy for 30 years and 40 years. And they had a lot of practical experience. I like to compare the difference between a scientific practitioner and a practical practitioner is the difference between a soil scientist and a gardener. You know, like these guys were gardeners, right? They've been out there working in the garden for 30 years. They knew things that worked with patients and things that didn't. And there were 4 of those guys, and every single one of them said, screen every one of your patients with a chronic disease for a food intolerance. You know, find it out and have the person eliminate it. And every single one of them, this has been their career, one of the moves they did in their career. And there were 4 of these elders there, and including Dr. Bastyr, who Bastyr University was named after, right? And one of them in particular, he was a Dr. Dick from Spokane, Washington, and he ran a clinic there, a large clinic there with many patients. They did hydrotherapy and homeopathy, natural medicine, and he screened all his patients. And he had been trained by his mentor, and this was a guy who started practicing in the 30s, right? And then this guy became his student in the 70s. And so anyway, so this was a long tradition in this lineage of, if somebody has a chronic disease, you have to screen them to find out what their food intolerance is. And so this guy, Dr. Dick, he would come to the Naturopathic College in the spring every year. He'd come for a weekend, and he'd do a weekend seminar, and he'd show a slideshow to the students there. These were people who were going to become doctors. And they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. His slideshow was before and after pictures of his cured patients. I'm talking about people crippled up in wheelchairs who were standing up dancing with their wife at the ball, right? And he had, of course, you get to cherry pick your best cases if you're making a slideshow, but he had somebody with bubonic plague. He sent the blood sample off to the state and cured the person, and then the test came back and said the guy had bubonic plague. But anyway, so I digress. What I learned from him was, oh, this wasn't just me. That was many people have this, right? So that became part of my practice immediately after that. So then fast forward 10 years, and then I was running a teaching clinic for herbalists and nutritionists at the Rocky Mountain Center for Botanical Studies. And I've actually been mentoring students in that residency. There's a succession of 3 schools: Rocky Mountain Center, then my school, North American Institute of Medical Herbalism, that became the Colorado School of Clinical Herbalism. But they've had one clinical residency program continuous through all that, and I've mentored the students in that program since 1996. And they're all trained in how to screen every person with a chronic disease, how to screen them for a food intolerance. And you asked how I got into it. Personally, I got into it, and then I got into it as a practitioner, and then finally I got into it in a teaching clinic. And what we do, I've trained about 400 students through that teaching clinic. And before we let them turn them loose on the patients, we make them all screen themselves for a food intolerance and remove that. So they have direct experience of that, and they can understand what's going to be easy or hard for their patient or things like that. And they can coach somebody through it if they've done it themselves. Kind of our motto is, you can't push spaghetti uphill. Like you have to do it yourself and then pull the spaghetti behind you. Like that. So that's how I got into it and how I've witnessed it. And I can say, I kind of challenged Dr. Dick because I was in this mindset that this was just me, right? And he was implying that everybody had one of these. right? He didn't say it, right? And I was kind of skeptical, and I said, do you really think like do you think everybody has something like this? And I thought he was a little bit extreme, and he just looked me straight in the eye and he said, young man, I was about 40 at the time. He said, young man, he said, if you're not willing to screen all your chronic disease patients for a food intolerance, coach them through an effective withdrawal, and advocate lifelong avoidance of that food, then you might as well find another profession. That's what he said to me. That you won't be able to do it giving out vitamin pills. You won't be able to do it giving out herbal formulas or whatever like that. You have to remove the inflammatory burden from the body. Right. So another question, I won't go into it right now, but why would foods be an inflammatory burden? We'll address that.
We have to address it because you just brought up so many amazing subjects here, and you set off my red flags, right? So, which of course it's like a little unfair to say, the before and after pictures are a gimmick, because it also, when it's real, right?
That's right.
But we're looking at a situation where you're saying, it sounds like you're saying this is the answer. This is the answer to everything, and that's the red flag part. And so, what I want you to talk to us more about is the, why. And you just mentioned inflammation, and another thing that you mentioned was the not saying that it's the answer necessarily, but saying that it gets in the way of the answer. So if a food intolerance is there, and that's why you're saying that you talked to your mentor and they said, look, if you're not willing to screen for food intolerances, then what are you doing here? So help us understand, like, is it food intolerances, or is this just like this, is food intolerances that people have, not eating the optimal foods for them, a barrier? And can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, it is. And I'll just make a historical reference. Everybody's heard of Hippocrates. It turns out I just want to say this, that it didn't take a cis white male to invent medicine, right? The current scholarly opinion is that Hippocrates never wrote a word, that there was this huge library in a medical school and they just moved it to Alexandria and put his name on all of them, right? So they call it the Hippocratic Corpus, right? And one of those books is called On Ancient Medicine. And it says, this isn't, you have to imagine, this is a book from maybe 500 BC that's talking about ancient medicine, right? What are they talking about, right? And they say the reason medicine arose, the very foundation of medicine arose, is because people observed that the diet that was good for one person was harmful for another. And and they say the quest of medicine is to determine for each individual the diet that's appropriate for them. And it mentions specifically foods, it mentions specifically dairy. This 500 BC, it says it will be found in some people, dairy can cause disease, and merely increasing the daily portion, doubling the daily portion, can cause the onset of a major illness. Right? It's referring to that 500 BC. Right. And then it says the idea is to individualize a diet for foods that cause symptoms. Right. We can explain physiological mechanisms why this happened, but it doesn't matter. Right. You eat the food, it causes symptoms. You avoid the food, the symptoms go away. Right. It's empirical, and that's what they're talking about. Empirically, foods that cause an issue. Right. And then also, he says also the quantity, like one person can eat big meals and another person has to eat smaller meals because they can't digest quite as much, right? And you find similar things in Ayurveda and so on. But timing of meals and how many meals a day, things like that is to individualize the diet. This is very ancient. And in the course, I think there will have a section in the course, I'm going to go through some history. And you can show this theme flows all the way through the history of medicine, all the way up to the homeopaths of the 1800s, they said exactly the same thing, right? They said, and herbalist, physiomedicalist herbalist in Scotland, right? I got to visit this old herb shop in Scotland that was 160 years old. And the owner let me look at some of their old formula books, right? And they had a label, a scrapbook with labels from their products from the 1940s. And there was this big label like that. And it was for a blood purifying formula, right? And alternative blood purifier. And all the formula pattern was, these are the herbs, this is what it does, this is what you take it for, and this is the diet you should follow while you're taking this formula, right? So this is actually part of traditional herbalism. Herbalists were always dietitians, right? So, but anyway, so this says you're taking this blood purifying formula, and it says one should ascertain that food which first causes heartburn, followed by bloating, and ultimately by constipation or copious gas, and avoid it, right? So here, Scotland, right? Okay, 1860, 500 BC in Greece, right? They're advocating exactly the same thing. And this is exactly what my mentors said to me. You have to screen everybody for foods that might be causing an irritation there.
Well, it's also what you're saying is that it might not be that this is a particular diet or framework for medicine, but it's more that maybe there's a problem with a mainstream culture that tries to fit people into a box and say, here's the standard American diet, it should work for everybody. If it doesn't work for you, there's something wrong with you. You should feel like an outsider.
Right.
You're not saying like this is it's like this is actually something that goes along as a partnership with any form of medicine and healing, because it's food.
It should. Well, let's just say we've had a number of, I'd say, I think I can point to 6 cases of people who had systemic lupus who went through this kind of protocol, right? They identified it and eliminated. Now, all 6 of them had to eliminate both dairy and wheat before they would be well. And then we did some other things with essential fatty acids, some things with herbs and everything, but they no longer meet the criteria for systemic lupus, right? They no longer have to medicate their systemic lupus, right? So what medicine, if we had good medicine, we would do this first, right? And the people who the food withdrawals didn't work for might get the steroids, right? But you don't give it to people with steroids when all you might have to do is remove dairy, right?
Right.
Okay, and then finally the prevalence. I remember what the doctor said. Not everybody in the world. It said you're a patient with chronic disease. You have something that's chronic, it's going on all the time, right? Right. The patient with chronic disease. So I'll give you some numbers. At one point. When I mentioned our students do withdrawal and re-challenge to try to identify food intolerance before they work in the clinic. And then as they're graduating from the clinic, I used to do a survey and ask people, how many people found out that you had a food that caused a symptom, and that when you avoided it for long enough, the symptom went away, right? And then when you eat the smallest amount of food, the symptoms start to come back. How many found that, right? And I'd take the survey. And at one point, it was my 236th student was graduating from the clinical program. And I did the survey. And at that point, well, let's just say I did that point. What percentage do you guys think, although I asked how many people found this, and what percentage of those do you think found that to be true for either dairy or wheat, gluten, or both? And what percentage? People just think in your mind, was it 25%, 50%, 75%, 90%? 235 out of 236 people found that dairy or wheat caused them to get symptoms. And when they avoided it, it went away. And
one or the other?
One or the other, or both. I'd say about a third of that group would have both. Now, I'll say that this isn't necessarily a random sample. Like people who want to become who come into natural medicine, often they come into natural medicine because they have something that conventional medicine hasn't been able to help, right? So they aren't necessarily a random sample, but I want to say this is not uncommon, right?
Right. So that's a group of people that weren't able to get help through conventional medicine, which, if anybody's familiar, like I remember being at a hospital and getting my Jell-O cup with a doctor's signature on it. So the food wasn't even part of the equation at all,
right?
And for the things that I've dealt with. So yeah, okay. So I mean, that helps.
So I'm going to tell you more. This is what I've seen with my own eyes. So I'm not talking theoretically. This isn't a cult. I didn't join some cult and get brainwashed. And I'm proselytizing that now. I've seen that, and see, these are my interns. So I see them intimately for 2 years, including mentor them one-on-one on all their clinical cases for between 9 and 12 months, right? So these are people I know very closely, and I witness in what happens in our clinical training. We call it community learning. I call it the Tom Sawyer paint the fence method of teaching. Is I make them do stuff and then report what happens to each other, right? So they're all learning from each other from practical experiments. And so that's how we have heard so many cases of, oh my goodness, it only took 3 weeks and I haven't had a migraine and they've gone away now. I don't have migraines anymore. Right. Yeah. So I hear these now 400 students, they give these reports. You hear them all the time. Now, if you can imagine every one of them, all those people, they've averaged between 10 and 15 patients a year in the clinic. So we're talking thousands and thousands of patients, and we screen or consider food intolerance for every one of those thousands of patients. And some of them engage in it and withdraw, and we usually see really good results. Right.
So my next question, and I definitely we're going to talk about your process for screening, but my next question is like, what are the mistakes that people make when they're addressing food intolerances, and then they say, oh, I tried that and it didn't work. I tried eliminating dairy and it didn't work. Or what are some of the common things? Because if you work with so many people, you're definitely going to see like not everybody is going to do what what you're recommending, right? And they're going to come back to you and say it didn't work.
There's three things.
You're going to describe me right now. It's going to be really embarrassing.
No. Number one, they don't actually withdraw everything. Right. So my patient, I say, well, you need to avoid milk products. And the person says, okay, well, the herbal formula, it helped my tummy and everything. But as soon as I ate some pizza, it got bad again. I said, I thought you were avoiding dairy. And he said, well, I stopped drinking milk. Right. So that's kind of a gross one. But people often, it's not a completely thorough elimination. And I'll give you an example. It's a classic case, repeated many times. This one is a perfect case. Is the woman had eczema. She had eliminated most of the dairy and her eczema got a little bit better, but she still had eczema. And she was putting cream in her coffee in the morning, right? And I advised her, I said, that's enough. A small amount like that is enough to keep your inflammation at a rolling boil. And she didn't believe me. And I understand why somebody might not believe that. It doesn't seem logical that a small amount can do something like that. But I will point out, how much influenza do you need in order to get sick, right? Right? How you go say, oh, it'd be okay to put a tablespoon of pneumococcus in my coffee, but as far as your body's concerned, that those food proteins are antigens, they're foreign things. So as soon your body recognizes them as something that's foreign and launches an inflammatory response against them. It doesn't matter if it's a spoonful or whatever, it's going to cause a problem. So this case, I said, oh, why don't you remove it? And so finally, she reluctantly, after some months, she did remove it. And 3 weeks later, her eczema went away. right? So 6 months later, she said, nah, that didn't happen. I'm going to start having cream in my coffee again, right? And she did it. 3 weeks later, the eczema returned, right? So this is the reason I said, number one, it's not complete. Like people have small amounts in their diet. And number two, it's not long enough, right? So we do generally our elimination, we do it is 6 weeks. You do a strict elimination for 6 weeks. You usually see dramatic improvement in 3, and then you'll see some more residual improvement in the next 3, usually. So it has to be long enough, has to be complete. And one of the magic words there is covert sources, right? Did you all know that bologna has milk protein in it, right? Many hot dogs have milk protein in it, right? You have to look. Did you know non-dairy creamer has milk protein in it? Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You have to read all the labels, and they'll put it under funny names. They'll call it casein. It'll say casein in it, or sodium caseinate or something like that. And what they did is they put some milk protein in there for some reason of their own for wanting to do that.
Yeah.
So covert sources, the milk in milk chocolate is sufficient to kick off some people's dairy allergy.
Right. So even just that little nibble, I've definitely been that person who, because it feels like it makes sense that quantity is going to make a difference. So it's hard to imagine small amounts, especially if somebody's symptoms are digestive. You just sort of think about it as like, oh, I ate so much,
Right.
But also, having to stick with something for 6 weeks or even have like a delayed 3-week response before the eczema comes back, I imagine that that's also confusing because that's enough time for a lot of other variables. So you start wondering, and I also know from experience, and I know you talked about this before too, but the kind of bargaining that happens when
Yeah, right.
somebody's like, well, I also am just really tired because of X, Y, and Z other things. And so it's easy, I think, to get really confused. So I wanted to ask about that kind of head game that can happen for a lot of people. And I'll just say, my personal experience is when I started to, I was told I had a dairy allergy when I was in kindergarten. So I was the kid who brought the little soy milk boxes to school, and everybody was like, look at you. And so, but I was also going to this person who everybody said, oh, don't go see him. You're going to have a dairy allergy.
Oh, yeah, right.
So I sort of started becoming skeptical of it. And so in high school, I started eating milk. I started eating cheese and pizza and ice cream and hanging out with my friends. And I felt fine. So I started thinking, wow, I was totally brainwashed into thinking I had a dairy allergy. But actually, I wasn't fine. I had a chronic sinus infection and digestive issues and skin problems and all these other things that I just kind of pushed through, I think, in my teenage years. But when I started trying to address it later, and eventually started catching up to me, I started getting really paranoid about food, like all foods. And it became really a challenge for me to figure out what to eat. And I didn't have a lot of support or guidance in that area. So I was very susceptible to, oh, you should do this or you should do that. So I would constantly change my diets around and, take various things that I thought were going to help. And I guess I'm wondering if you've seen some of that, the way that people can kind of spiral, because that's kind of how it felt to me. Like it felt like I was just becoming having more and more problems the more I tried to regulate food. And then I started becoming kind of angry at people who were telling me about food intolerances, because I guess the moral of the story is I eventually told myself, you got to be tough, eat whatever you want. And something about that attitude actually did help me at that time. But then it started to catch up to me again. So I don't think I'm right, but what do you have to say about people who are just like, tough it out, and that approach, and why some people actually
well, I can say what's missing in your case. Somebody said, you have a dairy allergy, don't eat dairy, right? our practice that we've evolved in our community, and that we're going to talk about a lot here. And what you will all do if you're going to do an after the seminar, we'll do a supervised elimination and withdrawal and re-challenge after Christmas. But the first thing you do is you make up a list of foods that you like, that are nourishing, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, restaurants where you can eat. You work on the positive aspect of the diet, right? Before you have to focus on this deprivational elimination. I can't have this and I can't have that. And says, oh my gosh, I can have lamb stew, right? I can have lamb stew for breakfast if I want, right? I can have a big steaming pot of vegetable bean soup. I can have this for desserts. I can have I can't have ice cream, but I can have frozen blueberries with coconut milk on the top and some sesame tahini and a little cinnamon, right? And you go, oh, and your mouth starts to water thinking about the blueberries with the coconut milk and the cinnamon, right? And the tahini, and it's sweet and it's fat and it's kind of like ice cream, and it's so much more nourishing than what ice cream is. So it's starting to please your deeper nourishment centers also. We have a deep instinct to nourish ourselves. Nourish, deeply nourish, right? So the idea is you shift the psychology from the deprivational thing over to the nourishing thing, a pleasurable, nourishing thing. That would have made a difference if you've been coached that way. It's hard for a teenager. I know it's hard for a teenager when all your friends are eating at the food court. But I mentioned that there were three things. One is it's not complete. Number two, it doesn't last long enough. And the third one, and this is huge, and we have a way around this that they're going to teach you, is you got better, but you don't realize you got better, right? And you think, oh, that sounds crazy. I'm my own best witness. No, you're your own worst witness for your symptoms, right? This is well known in medicine. Somebody does a medical intake. This is all schools of medicine. They do a medical intake, and it'll say, well, what's your symptom? And what are the symptoms score on a scale of 1 to 10? How bad is it? Right? And people will say, well, 8 on a scale of 10. And on a follow-up, a couple of weeks later, they'll say, well, how bad is that on a scale of 10? And people say, well, it's a 3. Right? But you ask the person, how do you feel? It said, it might be a little bit better, but I'm not really better. And then you look and you say, well, your pain score went from 8 to 3. And you go, wow, I didn't realize that. And the reason is this is not neurotic people. This is the human cognitive function. This is how we are, is that we can't remember how bad we felt 3 weeks ago. We might remember we felt bad, but you think back, it's okay, it's the 26th. Okay, on November 5th, what were your symptom scores? What symptoms did you have, and what were your scores for those? No way. So we teach this in our clinical program. I have a number of example cases. A woman came and she said she had a hip pain that kept her awake at night. See, what brings you here today? I have hip pain that's keeping me awake at night. What else is going on? Oh, well, the doctor said I have an ovarian cyst that isn't resolving and I might need surgery. Ouch. What else is going on? Well, I have abdominal bloating, right? And we go, oh, okay, well, and I go through this stuff and I say, well, I don't know, let's deal with the abdominal bloating first and see what else goes away, right? So it turned out she eliminated wheat for about 3 weeks. And I came in and I said, how are you? And she was very cynical and kind of grumpy. And she said, oh, I might be a little bit better, but so I get out her chart and I look and say, how's your hip pain? And she says, oh, I forgot about that, right? And this is not neurotic people. This is everybody. You can't remember that. So what we're going to do, if after this or during this, you want to do a food elimination, the first thing you do is make a set of all your symptoms with the symptom scores, right? And then after the withdrawal, you remember the woman, it took her 3 weeks before her eczema went away, right? So after that, about 3 weeks, you do another set of symptom scores. right? And then you'll see what went away, and you'll be surprised. On average, people usually guess about a third of their symptoms went away, and on average, about 2/3 of them go away after about 2 weeks. If they're actually allergic to that, everybody isn't necessarily allergic to the food they tried to eliminate. They suspected it, but okay. And then you do another, and then you do another at the 6 weeks. But so you have an objective counting of your symptoms, and you can measure your progress. So I dread it when people come and they say, "Oh, I tried eliminating that, it didn't work." The question is, was it complete? Was it long enough? And did they actually get better, but not realize, slowly get better and then slowly get worse, right? The person reintroduced the dairy. At week 1, they said, well, the eczema didn't come back. At week 2, they said the eczema didn't come back. At week 3, the eczema came back. Well, it can't be the dairy because it didn't do it after week 1 or week 2. Yes, it can be. The immune system works in these big, long cycles, right? Inflammation can work on these big, long cycles. It can take a while for inflammation in the gut to start working through your system, right? You're doing every day, a little stimulus every day, and then finally it builds up like a rolling boil and breaks out on your skin. So, okay. So those are the.
It sounds like part of like one of the mistakes too could be just like not having a process. Like I think back and I'm like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. Like I was just guessing for one thing, and I was under the assumption that I would notice a change pretty immediately, like within a couple of days, if it was working or not working. And because I was kind of just guessing, I was just, I'll try being a raw foodist for a while, or I'll try, whatever. So I was, just kind of all over the place. And I think, we'll talk a little bit about assessment, I think, in a moment, if you think it's right time. There was a few good questions, I think, we should maybe address first. But yeah, just like having those questions to bring out the information. Like you said, yeah, you don't always remember how you were feeling a month ago. But like one of the questions that's coming up, which I think we should clear up here, is, what's the difference between, are we talking about allergies here, or are we talking about sensitivity? And, can someone develop a food intolerance later in life that they didn't have before, or can they go away? I feel like there's some overlap in those questions, but yeah, could you clarify what a food intolerance is?
Oh, well, I can. A food intolerance is something that empirically causes you trouble, right? What was the homeopaths of the 1890s said, one should strictly avoid that food which oppresses the stomach and burdens the system. So how do you measure that? You don't measure that with a lab test. You measure that by eating the food and seeing if your stomach's oppressed and your system's burdened, right? As far as technically the difference between an allergy and an intolerance, I'll talk about that in a second, but you see all of the allergies you read. I'm pretty highly trained in how to read science, right? And I read scientific studies all the time, and I've read a lot into the science of allergy. And you'll see this repeatedly in the scientific medical literature. They'll say, well, we found the IgG antibodies to this elevated in these, so we did an elimination and a rechallenge. And they always go, the elimination and a rechallenge, comma, the gold standard, like that. And this is referred to throughout the whole science of medical immunology as the gold standard is actually elimination and rechallenge, a blind elimination and rechallenge, right? They'll do an experiment. They'll give somebody a little pill. One will have milk in it and the other one won't, and you won't know what they have, and they'll see if they erupt with the milk, right? So it's elimination and rechallenge. So this is what so that's what a food intolerance is something that improves when you eliminate the food and comes back when you take it back. And as far as the gold standard, you can do all kinds of intermediate stuff, like you can guess about this or that, or take an antibody test or that. And All of those people say this is a positive antibody test, but then we did an elimination and rechallenge, the gold standard. So what I like to say, we want to be Olympic champions. We're going to go for the gold, right? We're not going to settle for the silver or the bronze. We're going to go for the gold standard right away, right? You do an elimination and a rechallenge to identify the thing. Okay. So the next question. Technically an allergy or an intolerance, I'll just really quickly, in immunology, they're called 4 hypersensitivity pathways, right, which are associated with different kinds of antibodies, right? And one of them associated with IgE antibodies and mast cells, right? This is the stuff that's responsible for puffy eyes and hay fever and for eczema and stuff like that. That's one of the pathways of a superficial allergy and asthma. Right, that's technically what an allergy is the IgE pathway, right? The 3 other pathways, it isn't like, oh, those aren't merely intolerances. The 3 other pathways are like autoimmunity and other serious things. They're not technically allergies. So just forget about the thing. And I also like to say, you may not be able to prove that the reason your stomach is oppressed and your system is burdened. Maybe you can say what pathway it is or what one it isn't on a lab test. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is empirical. So we're trying to shift away from this mental construct of what a disease into practically what's a disease in your body, right? When are you thriving? When are you thriving at a higher level of health, and when are you just, there? So I could talk about another thing. Why would dairy and wheat cause a problem for humans? Haven't we been eating dairy and wheat for 10 or 15,000 years? Can I pursue that?
Please do. Tell us.
Would you like to?
This is really
would
good.
you like? Now I have a teleporter device here. This is my little magic Apple teleporter device, and I'm gonna take everyone right now. And you all have an allergy to dairy and wheat, and we're going to do an elimination diet. Click, click. It's now 20,000 BC. Okay. You're in some human community, 20,000 BC. Okay. You're now doing a complete elimination of dairy and gluten. It's not in your environment. It's not in your dietary environment, right? And that period of human evolution, dietary evolution, 2.4 million years. So for 2.4 million years, the Homo sapiens never ate milk other than their own mother's milk or a relative's mother's milk, and they never ate grass seeds, right? That's not the human diet. So, then you think, well, okay, the agrarian era came along and now people are growing grains and raising cattle and taking the milk and eat some people. So now, but we still have the hunter-gatherer genome. The genome didn't change in that time. It's hard to understand the time scales, but if Homo sapiens is 2.4 million years, that divides really nicely into 24 hours, right? Right. So if the human genome was 24 hours, right? We've been eating grains for 6 minutes of the last 24 hours of the human genome. We've been taking dairy for some humans have never had cow's milk or ungulate milk, right? But for 3 minutes, right, we've been having soy products for 45 seconds, and we've been having refined sugars, margarines, refined oils, and all that stuff for 6 seconds of the previous 20, so this is the framework of what we call the paleo diet. Now, you don't have to be dogmatic about the paleo diet, but the idea is if certain diseases only appeared with the sugar trade, right? Well, then maybe your cure for that is going to be wind history back before the sugar era, right? And take sugar out of your diet, right? And so for some people, to get better is going to be wind your dietary history back before the agrarian era and stop having grains and milk, right? And this isn't. I'm not a theoretician about this. We've seen thousands of people get better with this approach. I can tell you, maybe not right at some of the kind of things I've seen people get better from. It's yeah.
And it's almost would be interesting to shift the burden of proof, like prove that eating processed foods and sugars and dairy and gluten is something that can work for everyone. Because sure, it could work for some people, but you're not saying that like it's the answer to everybody's problems is to eliminate these foods. You're saying the answer to people's problems is to identify the foods that are optimal for them.
Exactly.
And that's the key, I think, for me, when I kind of when it started to click for me, I was like, oh, that's really what makes this different than a diet, because you aren't prescribing a diet, which is also part of the friction that I have, which is like, it's not, sometimes I just want someone to fix it and tell me what to do. And you're saying, no, Ryan, you actually have to become more mindful and aware, self-aware, and you have to really take leadership, and you're going to need support because it's not going to be easy, but it's up to you.
Yeah. Yes, it's not a diet, it's a process of finding your diet, right?
Yeah.
There's some things about strictness. Now, this doesn't apply for food intolerance. If that food, a small amount of that food is creating inflammation, you need to avoid that strictly, as if you teleported yourself back to when that stuff wasn't around. Like there were no Coca-Cola Springs or M&M bushes, right? Or right, ice cream flowers or anything like that. They weren't around, right? And you couldn't chase a buffalo down and steal its milk, right? Compete with its baby and steal its milk. You couldn't do that, right? Mother Nature's strict taskmaster as far as your diet. Certain things you can have, certain things aren't even going to be available. You don't even have to be tempted. No willpower involved, right? Right. Okay. That's nature. That's nature. Okay. So, all right.
And if you live in a community where nobody's eating those things, you're not going to feel like an outsider.
Yeah, it's true.
So
it helps. I like that we do this in a group, and as we're training our clinicians in the school, people are encountering this as a group. So it's almost like group therapy helps somebody support it. So we can support each other in this workshop, right? Mm-hmm. And we'll do, in January and February, there'll be, we can have a weekly check-in. We can check in, well, how am I doing? What did you withdraw? You see each other's reports, can ask some questions, get some encouragement. So that helps, a community of awareness. So other obstacles are family, right? You're going to do it, but your family isn't going to do it. Sometimes I know I had hi Charis, I had a friend, she's a practitioner, she was an ND in practiced in Rhode Island, I think, but she I'll never forget, what she said. She was giving a talk at a conference, and the kid had eczema, right? And she wanted the kid to cut out dairy, and the parents said, oh, but the other kids will, the baby will be looking at the other kids and seeing them eat dairy, and what they'll be crying for it. I could never do that. And she said, I remember what she said, well, let's have everybody cut out dairy and see who else gets better, right? And this has happened so many times, right? Like somebody's spouse agrees to do it with them just out of support, right? And then, oh my goodness, they got better from something that they knew they had, but they had no idea there could be something there. And I always like, one of my graduates, she graduated, and she approached me and says, I'm ready to start my practice. I don't know what I have to offer, right? And I didn't realize what she was at. She was asking how to market herself, right? But I asked her, I said, well, how many patients did you have over the clinic over the year? And she said, well, 10 with follow-ups. And I said, well, how did they do? And she goes, well, they all got better. And some of them got better from things they didn't know they had wrong in the first place, right? And I said, and you don't know what you have to offer, right? This is what we're offering here. It's possible to get better from things you didn't know were wrong in the first place. I know, do you all know, you're all here in a Zoom meeting. Do you all know how to raise your hand at a Zoom meeting? Do you know how to do that?
Do you want to do it, Paul, or do you want us?
Is it down at the bottom there? Where is it?
A couple people said, so it's, you click on reactions in your toolbar.
Oh yeah, in the toolbar down there. Yeah.
Yeah.
You click on reactions. Okay.
And you can raise and then you can lower your hand too. So
Oh,
yeah,
look at that.
kind of like a Zoom high five going on.
So I'd like to see, we got a bunch of people here. Put up your hand if you have experienced removing a food intolerance and having serious symptoms go away. Can you do that? Can we look down the side there? Look down. Oh my gosh, is that true?
And you
Did
can click on
everybody raise
gallery.
their hand at once? What? Oh my gosh, look at that. All right, well, I guess we're in the right room here. There we are. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I guess okay.
Wow.
I want to tell a story. I want to emphasize it can be, sometimes it's very serious conditions. I'm going to go through some in a section of the thing, but let's just say we had 2 patients with ulcerative colitis, which is very serious. You can have ulcerative colitis that has its own problems. You can develop colon cancer from that. They were both scheduled to have their colon removed, right? And we removed some food intolerances, gave them some anti-inflammatory nutrition and some herbal formulas. And both of these people were taken off the remove your colon list. This is not just for new, oh, I got a little achy joint, I'm going to remove my food intolerance. This can be serious issues. 2 people. Our joke is that we saved their ass, but anyway, that's then other one. I'll give you a case. It illustrates some of the points. This was a patient. She had all her lymph glands were swollen all the time. You have to imagine that's pretty serious, right? All parts of her body, like in her pelvis and her knee, and under her armpits. She had constant lymphadenopathy, they call it. And also she had terrible, almost disabling inhalant allergies, right? And I proposed to her that she had a food intolerance, and she, this is useful to tell about your failures. I thought she probably had a dairy intolerance, and she removed the dairy and didn't get any better at all. And I said, well, okay, I think you better try wheat. And she said, that's impossible. It can't be wheat, because for a year I lived in another country, and in that country I never ate wheat even once. And all of this stuff continued the whole time. It didn't get better in that year in that other country. So it can't be wheat. And I convinced her to try it, and she tried it, and all her lymphadenopathy went away. And her inhalant allergies went down to the point where she didn't have to take her medicines, right? Her allergy medicines, right? And so we did the re-challenge. And for the re-challenge, she'd been saving up for 6 weeks and went to her favorite bakery and bought this old pile of baked goods and cakes and cookies and breads and ate them for 4 days and felt like a piano had fallen on top of her head, and all her swollen lymph nodes started to come back and the allergies started to come back, right? So it's a nice story, because that's a pretty serious disease that was undiagnosable. No one could tell her what was wrong with her, but everybody knows it's not good to walk around with swollen lymph nodes year after year, right? And so this was pretty serious, pre-serious disease. But it turned out what happened in that country where she went, she had beer every night, and beer has gluten in it, right? So see, this is the case, small amounts, long enough, she actually never even actually completely eliminated the stuff. She ate it the whole time. And okay. And I followed it. This was probably 10 years ago, and she's still free of lymphadenopathy. She doesn't,
So Paul, what are some of the ways that people can identify their food intolerances?
Okay, there was what it said on the label. Find out that food which causes heartburn, followed by abdominal bloating, and ultimately by constipation or copious gas, right? So if you can identify, when I eat this food, I get this, right? Now, one of the problems with that is many times you have that all the time. Many people have abdominal bloating all the time, or they have heartburn all the time, or they have heartburn all the time, or much of the time, or constipation much of the time, right? Or all the time. And they're eating, so they're eating constantly. So they actually can't judge the food that's causing that because it's present all the time. So you have to remove it in order to try it again. But so I'll start out. I'm not going to get into this tonight. We go into it in some detail in the show. You can pay for expensive food allergy tests. They look for antibodies in your bloodstream, and sometimes they'll do stool, look at stuff in your stool sample, and those are not accurate, right? And they are well known not to be accurate in the field of science, right? So for instance, antibody testing for irritable bowel syndrome does not predict what food will improve irritable bowel syndrome on elimination and rechallenge, right? And I'm not saying that. The scientific studies say that, right? Some gastroenterologists said that. We said, well, antibodies don't help us predict what food is going to be beneficial to eliminate or give back. So it's possible you go to many different alternative practitioners. They'll sell you a $250 or a $500 or a $700 food allergy test. You get back a big computer printout and it has all these things that you might be allergic to. And these are not valid scientific tests. So I say, go for the gold, go for elimination and rechallenge. So then now you say, where should I start? Where shall I start? And what I think is that most people suspect that they have a problem relationship with a food, right? Now one of the antibody tests they said had a 70% accurate rate. And I think if I ask somebody, I says, well, some people are allergic to dairy or wheat. Do you think you might be allergic to one or the other of those? Can I see another show of hands in here? Right. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Most people suspect that already. Okay. That's already more accurate than an antibody test. Right. Okay. Now, then the other thing is, I'll say, you think you have a food intolerance? People say, well, maybe I have an issue. I'd say, well, I don't know what you mean. And I'll say, where's the food that when you eat it, it causes symptoms, digestive symptoms or other symptoms. You eat it, you get a headache or things like that. And then people will have a suspicion on that. And our joke is there a food that, because people with a food intolerance, people develop cravings, and people will develop serious cravings for the food that they're allergic to. Now, we might have to wait to talk about all of the why until we're in the full seminar, right? But just, it's an empirical fact. You'll say, is there some food you feel like you have an addictive relationship with, that your day wouldn't be complete without it, your meal wouldn't be complete without it? When you get under stress, you go to that for a comfort food, right? And our joke is, if it were your last day on earth and you were offered your last meal, what food would have to be in that meal? It is sometimes that kind of, people will laugh and giggle, oh yeah, that would be dairy, right? And that people know that kind of addictive relationship where you have a withdrawals and craving and withdrawal and craving, withdrawal and craving. People have that. If you have that kind of relationship, that would be a food to test.
Mm-hmm.
We're not, that would be, you want to have a starting point of how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that would you, okay, everybody in the chat box, put what the food is. Oh yes, here you go. Oh yes, coffee, ice cream. Oh yes, ice cream. Yes. Oh yes, cheese. Somebody had me quit the top 6 foods I ate every day. Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, it's chocolate. Talk about gluten cross-reactive grains. All right. We'll talk about all of that. Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about all of that. But so this is, you have a suspicion. If you describe the pattern, you have a suspicion. That's the one you start with. And okay, that's the one you'll be motivated to start with because you already have a suspicion. There's also, if you start taking the seminar and you start asking yourself, if I had one, what would it be? And you think, okay, but you're sort of, now you're curious. So what happens is your unconscious mind is starting to work on this, right? And you're starting to notice. So you take a month or 6 weeks following your regular diet, but you're sort of asking yourself, is one of these a problem food? And often your unconscious mind will start going, bingo, I really think it's that, right? Because your unconscious mind is in there. It's constantly working to nourish you. Think of all the functions you do that are unconscious, right? And especially things like what foods are going to nourish me or not. Your unconscious mind knows that. Your inner instincts know that. Your deep instincts that know that. So if you start inquiring of yourself what it is, sometimes you're over days, weeks, months. Sometimes it'll become clear what it is.
There's something really neat about how the inquiry or asking the right questions and kind of having someone else too, kind of like asking you the questions. It's revealing that can be so much more accurate than the antibody tests as well, because the framework of the testing is more mechanical, right? The body is a certain way and we're going to run a test. Whereas, you can't really rely on just asking people questions. But there's something about having to answer questions and really work on our relationship with food that's kind of the point of your approach. And I don't mean your approach. You're teaching this, but this approach that's so consistent throughout so many healing traditions.
Right. There's some things you could do, quick things. Now, this would work for a positive test, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean you're not allergic to it. But you get up in the morning and you take your pulse, right? You sit and relax and take your pulse, right? And then eat some of the food you suspect, right? And then take your pulse every 10 minutes for the next hour, right? And write it down. And if just sitting there, your pulse goes up 10 or 15 points, right? You're having a stress response to eating that food. You're still sitting there, right? There's a name for that. It's the Coca pulse test. And it isn't because you take coca beans, right? It's a Dr. Coca in the 50s developed that as a food intolerance test. The problem with that is you won't have a false positive to that. In other words, if you get a stress response with an elevated pulse, well, that thing's causing stress in your system, right? It's probably causing inflammation in your stomach and stress in your system. But if you don't get the pulse response, it doesn't mean you're not allergic to it. Because sometimes that food has to go into your stomach, be broken down into smaller peptides, and over a course of hours be transformed into something. And then that's the thing that causes the problem. Right. So the immediate thing might not cause the problem. And I swear it's like the woman with 3 weeks to get the eczema. Right. There are things you can eat a food on Monday and have the reaction on Wednesday, and you don't make the connection too much. So it's not always acute. If it is acute, that would be one. That was something you all could do yourself. You could just do it tomorrow if you want. If you take your suspected food, see if your pulse goes up, you might have an idea there. My mentor, Dr. Dick, his mentor was Dr. Carroll, Dr. O.J. Carroll of Spokane, Washington. And at one time, Dr. Carroll ran the largest health spa west of the Mississippi River, right? He had patients come from all around the world to be cured of chronic diseases there. And but Dr. Carroll, during the 1930s, he was a master physician. And one of the skills that physicians learn is listening for abdominal sounds and listening to the heart, right, with a stethoscope. And if you draw a 9-grid tic-tac-toe grid on your abdomen, right, the doctor listening for bowel sounds listens with their stethoscope over each of those 9 segments and listens for sounds, right? And they should hear little gurgling in there, right? And signs that things are moving in there. And this Dr. Carroll he had listened to heart. By that time, he'd been practicing for 30 years, and he would listen to hearts, and you listen to the heart and you can listen for rate or rhythm, but he could hear subtleties in there. And he said, well, the rate and the rhythm didn't change, but this person, they ate the food intolerance and you could hear over their heart. It was like a semi-tractor trailer truck downshifting to go uphill, you hear the trucks going uphill at night on the freeway. And he said you can hear a straining, a stressing in the heart sounds, right? So what he did, I love the method that we should all do this in all the affairs of our life. He had most of the people got better, with the methods that he used. A bunch of them did, but a bunch of his patients didn't get better with his normal treatments. So he did a deep, intense study of the patients that didn't get better. He wanted to know what he could learn from the patients that didn't get better. And what he found, the common factor he found in his patients who were stalled. I like earlier you said, Ryan, that the food intolerance could be the thing getting in the way of you getting better, right? That something was getting in the way of them getting better. And he listened with this intense physical exam. He found that the heart sounded, sounded stressed, right? And that there was an absence of the normal sounds over the stomach. So he derived from that person had eaten a food that caused inflammation in the stomach, which caused a reactive stress response, right? See, so this was how he found it with a stethoscope, similar to Dr. Koka, right, who found the acute stress response when people ate that. So this is the beginning of why would a food cause a systemic problem, right? This is just part of it, that when that food, that as you have a really, really, really robust immune system in your digestive tract. It's really robust. It's much stronger, much more powerful than the immune system in the other areas of your body, right? It's called the GALT, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, right? And immunity, and it's very robust. Remember that you basically have a river of poop going through there, right? And your body needs to protect itself against the bacteria, right? Against that microbiome. So it's this robust immune system. And certain foods, they're seen as foreign antigens, they're seen as a threat, and you will initially launch a local immune reaction against that in the gut. And then in future classes, we could talk about the exact pathway. What's the dotted line between the heartburn and the sore joint? What's the dotted line between the heartburn and the inflamed cervix in the uterus, or the heartburn and the migraine headache? What's the dotted line, right? And there is, and it was mainly been discovered mainly in the last about 15 or 18 years is when I started finding it in the literature. They know exactly now how an immune reaction in the gut creates immune components, which then circulate widely in the body and will aggravate any area, and they can initiate or aggravate inflammation in other areas of the body in response to inflammation in the gut. And
wow, thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
So it's 8:14, so we need to make sure we shift into some Q&A here. Mm-hmm. And also, but before we do Q&A, I just wanted to let everybody know that do a quick public service announcement, and then we'll go into Q&A. We are, as you know, and as is mentioned in last year as well, we are about to get started with the online course, Food for Optimal Health with Paul, that's starting on November 9th. And so we're going to hang out and just talk a little bit about how the program works and how the program has worked for students last year. Some of you in the chat have already shared your experience of being in the program, so welcome to all the students that are here right now. But we're not going to talk about that until after we do some Q&A. But who here is interested in hearing about the program? Because it would be really good to kind of make sure that we stick around and share that with you. Talking a little bit about the assessments that are included, and the support system that we set up for students, and some of the changes that we're making this year to go even deeper with the program. But we're definitely, like, part of this webinar is to introduce the idea of food intolerances and talk about why it's important. And then, we just want to make sure we share these details with all of you that are interested. So yes, okay, great. Kate, Darlene, Jenna, Deborah, cool. Yeah, and one of the things that, if you've been around BotanicWise for a while, like when there's a new online program, Charis sends, and we work as a team to create webinars and create educational content, because the goal of these programs is not to convince people or to just say, oh, you need this program. The goal of the enrollment period is to really just talk about the topic and gather all the people who are really ready to go deeper on it, and then hopefully educate and support a lot more people in the process as well. So it's been really fun, and it's great to see, there's a lot of interest in this. So let's do some Q&A, and then we'll circle around and we'll give a kind of a tour of.
Can you throw the slide up again, Ryan? Somebody was asking to see that slide again.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Oh, I see what you're trying to do. You want to get that early bird coupon. Yeah, we are going to, for folks who stick around, we'll share a $75 toward the program that's only shared on the webinar. So it's not, we're not sending out emails with, discounts or anything like that. We just do that for the folks who are here live. So while we have this up, think of a question, put a question in the chat. I'm already going to go through some of the ones that are there. And Charis, you're always really good at picking out questions. Will you help me with this portion?
Yeah, sure, of course.
That'd be great. Was there any questions that stood out to you so far on, on the
well,
in the chat?
One question that I saw early on that I thought was really good question was somebody was asking about histamine diets and histamine response, which you did address a little bit, but maybe you could go into that a little bit more, Paul.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated. People can develop a histamine sensitivity. This can be secondary to nutrient deficiencies. It can be secondary to a vitamin C deficiency, right? It can be secondary to a B vitamin deficiency, right? And in fact, hyperreactive histamine responses is one of the symptoms of one of the B vitamin deficiencies. And so regardless of whether, you end up diagnosed with histamine hyperreactivity syndrome or whatever they call it. Now you've got a label. Now that's your identity, right? I say in those cases, let's let the label go away. Let's normalize the nutrition, right? Let's normalize the nutrition and let's remove offending foods, right? And see what gets better, right? Now, there are sometimes some people can benefit from what they call a low histamine diet, right? But I don't want to say anything is absolute, but in general, if you just build things toward the normal, you don't have to worry about avoiding histamine foods, right? You want to zero in on, is it the gluten thing doing that, right? That gluten molecule, right, is toxic to your gut, right? And if you remove that, all kinds of other things are going to get better, right? Or one of the milk, there's actually 8 different proteins in milk that you can make antibodies to, right? And so those are going to be the main things. And you need to be fully nourished at the same time. We have this myth that, you know, Americans are not starving anymore, like Americans knew hunger and starvation during the Great Depression. They're not starving anymore, but we have people are starving for magnesium, they're starving for B vitamins, for zinc, vitamin C, essential fatty acids, and so on. We're practically, it's an epidemic of micronutrient malnutrition. In North America, usually some very basic nutrients there. So if you have a basic, we'll talk about a basic generic nutritional protocol that most modern people need, and in many cases, if you do that, but what we're really promoting here, you can do all the other fancy things, right? But you have to go back to that Hippocratic treatise on ancient medicine. You have to find that food which causes those problems, right? And remove it, or you will never be well until you do that, right? You'll never be well as long as you're consuming foods that are inflaming your digestive system and causing reflex issues in the rest of the tissues in the body.
Another question is, how does SIBO fit into this scenario?
Well,
let's define that. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. This is kind of a new theory. People started, that gastroenterology has recognized something called SIBO, like for 50 years. And that's something that typically occurs in elders as, you know, tissues are wearing down. And with elders, it occurs where colonic bacteria start to invade up into the end of the small intestine, and people develop chronic diarrhea and weight loss. So gastroenterology has recognized this SIBO. Now there's it's a huge trend in alternative medicine, naturopathic medicine, functional medicine. Their theory is that the reason you have this abdominal bloating is because you have a bacterial overgrowth there. And then all you have to do then is just take some antibiotics and kill off that bacteria and everything will be fine, right? Right? So maybe you're going to do that, right? Maybe you want to do that. I wouldn't do that first. Right? I'd screen for the foods first, right? Because what we're going to see, and I have some photographs, talk about before and after photographs. I have some photographs of abdominal bloating secondary to food intolerance. And many practitioners will see abdominal bloating and they'll say, you have SIBO, right? Well, now, they can give you a certain test. It's a breath test. They look for exhaled gas that comes from bacteria. And they can say, okay, well, you're going to eat this thing. And if you see in less than 2 hours, you start seeing gas coming out at a higher than normal level, then that means you have too many bacteria in there, right? I don't want to use up the whole thing in this. This is controversial in gastroenterology because there are no standards for what normal is, right? The practitioner selling you the test and selling you the treatments for it and everything will use certain standards, but as far as medical science is going, there's no standards for that. So it's controversial. But I'll say this: we've probably treated 3,000 people with symptoms that would be diagnosed symptomologically as SIBO ever since 1996 when I started running a teaching clinic. Probably 3,000. Not one of them did we use a bacteria killing strategy. If you normalize the ecology, the bacteria will take care of itself. Okay, that's kind of my answer to SIBO, right? There is
sorry.
Sometimes SIBO is secondary. People have heartburn from their food intolerance, so they give them drugs to turn off your stomach acid, right? And so they turn off the stomach acid. So now that's one of your normal bacterial safeguards. So now they get SIBO because they're taking a protein pump inhibitor for the food intolerance, right? Which doesn't solve the problem. If you can solve the heartburn, stop taking the proton pump inhibitor, the SIBO takes care of itself on that. And I have to say, you know, I supervise in 2 different clinics. I supervise on an ongoing basis. I supervise cases in the teaching clinics. And in Boulder, Colorado, we get a stream over the year, a stream of patients who have come to us who were diagnosed with SIBO, who were given antibiotics by their naturopath or their functional doctor. They're not better, they're worse, right? They didn't get better with 1 course, so they gave them a 2nd course. They're not better, they're worse. And then now we have to use these methods, except now they all have dysbiosis because they took a bunch of antibiotics on that.
So we have a question sort of related to that, which is, what about neurological conditions like MS? And I'm going to just kind of expand on that. You could give a little list maybe of some of the conditions in the clinic that you've seen resolved, you know, beyond just digestive issues.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, I mentioned we could go through the system: migraine, headache, multiple MS. I can honestly say 1 case, right? But the trick was to avoid gluten and take vitamin D, and the progression of the MS was stopped in its tracks, right? And the person felt they got a whole new lease on life, right, when they started doing that. Systemic lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, yeah, eczema, of course, cervical dysplasia, many different kinds of skin conditions, autoimmune Hashimoto's thyroiditis, this is a thing called ITP, idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, which is autoimmune against the platelets and causes blood clotting disorder, completely cured. I'm just thinking what I can remember off the top of my head. And we have a section in the class where we go through a bunch of case studies. I think we go through 28 case studies or something, showing this got better, that got better, that got better, that got better.
Yeah, Leah's asking a little bit more about the program itself. Like, what do we offer in this program that's beyond just eliminating gluten and dairy? Like, you know, there's a lot that we go into every week. Can you share a little bit about that, Paul?
Well, sure. We want to. Well, we go into the history of it. We go into the why, the pathophysiology, right, in detail of exactly what's happening when you have abdominal bloating and then you have stuff leaking from the lymphoid tissue circulating in the system, attaching to an area of inflammation and aggravating that or causing autoimmunity. How proteins in foods that are bioidentical to proteins in your tissues. So you make an antibody to that protein in food and then it will attack your own tissue. That's how foods can be involved in autoimmunity that way. When we get to the method, we have a general approach to diet, to dietetics, and to diet changes. We have also a generic kind of supplement protocol that supports normal inflammatory conditions, normal function. And then we have some herbal formulas, basic herbal formulas that you can take. We call them in our clinic our gut healing tea, right? They're herbs that you can take that can help resolve the inflammation and the uproar and the turmoil that's been caused by the food intolerance. And some people with a food intolerance, you can take those formulas and it'll sort of make the symptoms get less or go away for a while. But the real issue is when you do the withdrawal, you want to take those in order to heal the tissues and bring them back to normal, right? And it helps with the recovery of the recovery from that. We give some case history, some stories of recovery, you know, how it happened in people. This is what I can remember. Oh, what else do we have, Charis?
There's a number of questions just kind of, yeah, going into like, you know, different types of of conditions, like what about arthritis, or what about ADHD? So
Yeah. Okay. Oh, here we go. There is, this is one of the ways that seeing one case after another, we started identifying in the late 1990s. We call it in our clinic, we call it the food intolerance triangle of symptoms. And this is where you see there's something gastrointestinal, right? And then there's something at the mood energy level, like depression, anxiety, fatigue, right? Something going on. And then something at the musculoskeletal level, right? A musculoskeletal or skin level, right? So you'll see a digestive symptom plus mixed depression and anxiety with chronic fatigue, and then maybe eczema or arthritis or a joint problem or something like that. And because we do, I'm not just like, the big boss, the big master there. We always do teamwork. And so we have our clinical faculty. Each case in our clinic, the clinical faculty collaborates on that. We do it with shared documents. But so the clinical faculty, well, what do you think about this? What about that? And make ideas for the residents, right? And we came up and started recognizing the idea of this triangle, and it was in 1997, and we started saying, well, this is our theory. If somebody has all three of those, it's probably a chronic disease relative to a food intolerance. And if they identify and remove the food intolerance, all three of those will probably improve or go away. So this was our hypothesis in 1997. And we have found nothing to contradict that hypothesis since 1997 in our clinical work. And so people have mental things like depression, anxiety, panic disorder. I can recall exactly. I can recall 6 cases. The person was diagnosed with panic disorder or disabling anxiety, right? And within 3 weeks, they were panic or anxiety free after removing their food intolerance, right? So, and there's the reason. The food is stressing. The food's a trigger. You have this facilitated pathway of panic and anxiety, and then as soon as something gets triggered, the pathway gets wakened up. There we go. Like that. So, yeah. We've also other things, more serious mental illnesses have resolved with that. Yeah.
So it's 8:33, and so we need to start wrapping up here. I'm just tempted to keep going into some of these things because I have some questions as well. But what I wanted to share or ask you to go into a little bit with the program, and I'm going to bring the slide up just for folks who have been waiting. Is it okay if we talk a little bit about the program? Because people are asking, and I guess this is the transition question. A couple of people said, how can I work with you? Are you taking on clients? And so this program is actually set up as a way to work with Paul. So can you talk a little bit about that, Paul? Like how we've set up this program and how it worked last year for giving people that support to identify their food intolerances and then get the support to follow through with it.
I don't see private clients over telemedicine. But this is consider this like a group visit. And one thing I want to emphasize, this does not take the place of your doctor. All right. If you have an autoimmune disease or something, talk to your doctor. I cannot think of any hazards to removing a food. I'm not aware of any hazards that would trigger any particular problem. Some dietary, you wouldn't want to do, say, for instance, a ketogenic diet if you were a medicated diabetic, right? That could cause your meds to become toxic. I can't think of anything where that would do that. But this is not, to answer your question, this is not medical care I'm giving you. This is coaching on food intolerances and coaching group coaching on methods for elimination and re-challenge of that. The only thing, when we get up to the re-challenge section, some people, if you ever have anaphylactic reactions to foods, I don't recommend you re-challenge with those foods, right? Unless you have an EpiPen or a doctor or a nurse standing by for that. So, okay.
Great. And so what we'll do is kind of give you a quick tour and show you a little bit about what the schedule looks like and what the program looks like. So it's a 6-week program. There's Paul's classes, and then there's, which we would call the core curriculum. And then there are guest instructors. So those happen on Thursdays. The A&P of gut lining with Tammy Sweet. We've got Dr. Maya Shatreat. We've got David Winston. And this is all just, and feel free to jump in, Charis, about this as well, because this is all about kind of giving this curriculum a real well-rounded perspective, right? Bringing in other herbalists in the community to teach on things. But it is a 6-week program. And then what it also is it's a community of students. So you're actually able to connect with other students in the BotanicWise platform, live events, forum, ongoing Q&A, where Paul's able to jump in and respond to things that you are bringing up, and meetups. And then there's also the 40-day food challenge, which is a really big part of the program. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how it went. And yeah, Charis, will you share a little bit?
Well, that was the icing on the cupcake, as it were, since we're talking about food last year in the program. And if you were participating in the program and you're still on this call, you can put in the chat what you thought about that. But basically, you know, when we say there's group support in this program, the group support was absolutely phenomenal. The conversations that were happening within the community, the recipes, the ideas, the alternate foods, everybody was jumping in and really supporting each other. I learned so much from the community, like besides what I learned from Paul and the guest speakers, the community was full of so many people who have really been working on this topic and shared so generously. And what I'm really excited about this year, because I'm going to participate in the 40-day food challenge again in January, is that we're inviting the students from last year to participate. So they're going to be present. You're going to have, you know, some more experienced students who have been through the process. If you've got questions, your questions are going to be answered by others, including Paul, who is actually also active in the community. So I've never experienced an online course like this. Like I was truly blown away by it last year, just by how much community we really managed to build through this platform.
And then what happens is after the live sessions, which you can see, there's a full calendar. You can actually RSVP to the whole calendar and get notified when they go live. But after each live class, the table of contents is then updated with the produced video. So we make a kind of produced video with chapters and, you know, specific list of all the topics covered. And then you can go into that, you know, week 2 lesson, and you can watch the replay and, you know, get all the details and everything for that week. And then you can also check it off and keep track of your progress if that's something you like to do.
Yeah, and I just want to confirm that the 40-day food challenge is included as a bonus to the 6-week program. And we really wanted to do, I wanted to have the 40-day food challenge because when I took Paul's course the first time, I just took it on audio CD driving around in my car. And I loved it so much, but I didn't get to experience really what it was like to do this withdrawal and challenge. And I had so many questions for him. So he's going to be there. He's going to be with us every week through that food challenge to guide us through the nuts and bolts of how to do it properly. So we don't step into those pitfalls. Is that right?
Yeah.
And and then get a result that we can't trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a big update from the CDs. I loved though listening to Paula. I never told you this, but Frida, my wife Frida, introduced me to your work by playing your CDs on a long road trip.
Oh,
She was like, "This will help," and it was great. It was really great.
Mara's paying attention too, because that's how she learned so much too. She's only 11. Well, back then she was only 9. And she was into it and paying attention, and she's still thinking about doing the 40-day food challenge this year.
yes. I just, my joke is I have about 600 hours of audio courses that I sell through my school, and thousands of people have bought those. And I like to say I have jealous husbands and boyfriends all across the land saying, "Oh, you listen to him more than you listen to me." And kids who have grown up hearing my voice, right? So
I love it.
It's very soothing, Paul.
yeah. Okay.
So it would be great to hear, like, if who here is considering addressing food intolerances, and of course, we'd love to know if you're considering the program and what questions you might have. But really, what we want to do is make sure that this is a good fit for you, because we don't want you to sign up unless you've answered those questions and made sure that it is a good fit. And so as much as we can share about the program or about other people's experience, we'd love to. And of course, there's, BotanicWise has a refund policy, because it really is important to make sure that it's a good fit for everybody. But it was really great to see, it just feels so good to do something. And we were talking about this before we went live too, Paul was sharing, but just how good it feels to work on a project that so many people have feedback about, that's, about how wonderful it was. It certainly makes it easier for us to, we definitely want to do it again when we get that kind of feedback. But yeah, a question of what day is the live class? It's at 7 p.m. Eastern on Mondays and Thursdays, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Tuesdays and Thursdays. Oh yeah, here we go.
Paul's schedule changed. And
it's
Lori's
all
wondering
recorded,
if you
of
could
course.
review that schedule again if you want to pull it up again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great.
Elizabeth just registered. She's looking forward to it.
Oh, good. Yeah. Folks register here. Let us know. And yes, once you become a student, you always get the program. So everybody who registered last year are all getting to jump in on the program again if they want to. And so, yeah, you just get all the improvements and updates and ongoing access, beyond the 6 weeks, to the community of students and the Q&As and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Haley's asking if the classes are 1 to 2 hours, and the core classes with Paul last 1.5 plus hours. We'll say plus because the Q&A, we often go on the Q&A for a little bit. It's your chance to have access to Paul in the live class. And then the guest speakers are an hour plus a Q&A. So I also want to mention, for those of you who have, there's still really good questions coming through the chat. We are going to meet again next Tuesday to talk a little more with Paul. So you're welcome to join us again. We'll send you an email. You'll have to register again. Sorry about that, but that's just the way Zoom works. But we'll have you register again, and we're going to continue this conversation. We'll be talking about some of the same things that we reviewed already, but I'm sure the Q&A part will be brand new because it's fresh every time.
I'd like to add one thing. Some of you I know are herbalists and practitioners and so on. This is a life skill, but this is the same information I use to train my clinicians to guide other people through elimination and re-challenge. So this constitutes professional training also, and will give you a skill set you can work with your patients. So.
And Laurie's asking, is there a portal for the community participation? And you're looking at it right now. Ryan's sharing the actual platform where you're going to have your own account and be able to communicate with all the students. You'll be able to find students who are local to you. You'll be able to communicate with Paul directly. We have a whole topic for questions for Paul, and he answers them every week. He's very diligent about it. Yeah, lots of things people share, and you'll have all the recipes and things that have been posted last year. Access to all of that.
We also discovered that the search function is really good. So if I want to search for something like ice cream, oh, no results. Maybe I need to search for something like dairy-free ice cream. But
or gluten-free, yeah.
There, cookies. And so, now I'm starting to get into some content here, but the idea is that as you add things, as you share recipes or as you share questions, it becomes this community resource that we're all contributing to and benefiting from together. So that's really cool. There was a question I don't want to skip over, which is this a class only for those with chronic issues?
No.
And why not, Paul?
Well, first of all, if you're a practitioner, you could learn a skill set to practice with people who do have chronic issues. But otherwise, I'm going to ask, are you sure you don't have a chronic issue, right? People have low grade, I'm sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, right? People don't have some diagnosed disease or whatever, but people do not get up in the morning bright-eyed. I had one of my patients, you're always trying to find language for what healthy is, right? And one of my patients, I just loved it. She came, I said, well, how are you doing? And she said, I realized something was going on when I found myself dancing to Marvin Gaye while I was fixing breakfast for my teenage kids, This is okay. You say you don't have a chronic issue, but are you dancing to Marvin Gaye? You fix breakfast for your kids, A lot of people have become used to having a tummy ache. They become used to having constipation, right? They become used to having not really top-notch energy or whatever. So they think I don't have anything chronic going on just because something's not diagnosable. And so I say people can start here. This would be optimal, and this would be diagnosable chronic disease. And there's a gap there, right? Where a person just doesn't feel really well, right? So, so it wouldn't be, if you wouldn't be wanting to do this if you didn't think there would be some benefit to it. So I would say, though, you don't need to have a diagnosed chronic disease for this to be a benefit, right? If you, many people will feel better. Well, somebody used one patient used the example, I found myself at a level of health that I didn't know was possible because I'd become used to this habitual place of being at suboptimal health, right? So,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And people find a lot of ways to push through those symptoms and seek out a lot of various, I'm talking about myself here, but seek out a lot of various ways to patch up the symptoms so that they can push through and function. But that was for me a realization of realizing, oh, I'm trying to treat myself so that I can keep eating ice cream. That's actually what I'm doing. I'm looking for what herbs I can take and what things I can do because I don't want to stop eating ice cream. But I knew, and I know that it's ice cream that was causing the problems. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Charis or Paul, do you have any last things you want to say?
No.
I want to
Yeah.
say see you next week, and we can continue this conversation next week. Yeah, I'm excited to get back together and expand on it next week.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you both, Paul and Ryan.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
We'll make sure to send out the replay video tomorrow and everything. So yeah, thank you. And if you all are getting in on the program, Abby, can you put the link in the chat one last time? Make sure you get that $75 toward the program tonight when you use this link. Only sharing this with you on the webinar. Thank you.
Good.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Mara.
Bye, Mara.
Bye.
Mhm.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Shirley. Oh, good. Awesome. Yay.